Hey,
Hey,
everybody.
everybody, and welcome to another After Action Report podcast.
We are with our good friend, Mr. Mike Hildebrand. Hello, Mike. How are you?
Bobby and Mike,
What's going on?
I'm glad to be here, man. Looking forward to this. I've really enjoyed all of the shows that I've seen so far. Greg Knoll, Mike Callen, Phil McCardle, Rick Emery.
Yeah, if you're watching this show and you're wondering to yourself, who is Mike Hildebrand? Go ahead and pretty much pick up any textbook in this world that has the
Seriously, look to
words
the left or the
hazmat on
right.
it, and you will see this man's name somewhere on the front cover. I can pretty much promise you that. So it is truly, truly, truly a great pleasure to have somebody of this caliber come on the show and talk with us. We are greatly looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it.
Mike, tell us, give us a little bit of background on yourself. Give us the Reader Digest Plus version of who Mike Hildebrand is.
Well, first and foremost, I think of firefighters as like Marines. Once a firefighter, always a firefighter. I started my career as a firefighter, and while I've done a lot of different things and gone a lot of different places, I still think of myself as a firefighter. That's how I got my start. Uh, it changes though. It drives my wife crazy. She goes into the restaurant and sees the table setting and the candles, and I'm looking for the fire exit. I want,
Yeah.
we go to the park, and she sees a nice place for a picnic, and I see a plane crash or a mugging in the park.
Yeah.
It definitely affects your way of looking at the world.
Do you count the doors in hotel rooms to the exit? So if you have to crawl through the floor, you know which one the stairwell is?
I'm not that anal, but no. But I do look for the exits. Yeah, it definitely changes your way of looking at the world.
Hey, Mike, we are getting one comment saying that you're a little low. Can you bring the mic a little closer to your mouth? Or
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Maybe just yell.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
How's that, guys?
Perfect. Love it.
All right, yeah.
So
Yeah,
where'd you get your start?
Uh, well, I grew up in Hagerstown, Maryland. Uh, my dad made explosives for 32 years.
Legitimate or like kind of on the side?
No, legitimate.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you
Yeah.
never know. Gotta ask.
Yeah, he worked for DuPont at Falling Waters, West Virginia plant. Most kids grew up around the dinner table talking about what they did in art class and soccer. And my brother David and I learned how to make dynamite and TNT. And he was a big safety guy. I think the joke was we were the only kids in the neighborhood that cut the grass with steel toe shoes and safety glasses. He used to get, the DuPont would send all the employees Safety magazine, and it was required reading. So if there's any DuPonter kids out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And he would ask questions, he would drill down and ask questions, like what did they mean by that? So yeah, I think I kind of got interested in that. And one of my jobs as a kid, we're going back in time now, but one of my jobs as a kid back in the day, everybody had a burn barrel. So you had to pay to have your garbage picked up. So if you could lighten the load by burning half of it, you did. So being the oldest, that was my job. And my dad always said that he knew I was either going to be a really good arsonist or a really good firefighter. And
They're one and the same.
it turned out okay. Yeah, so I had a kid in my Boy Scout troop named Curtis, and I had a paper route. And one day I was coming home. I hadn't seen him at the scout meetings for a while. One day I was coming home, and it was night. It was dark, I was from my paper route, and there was the fire trucks were all over the street, hoses everywhere, and I saw there was a garage fire, and I saw my friend Curtis there. And I said, "What are you doing?" He had his turnout gear on. He was about 3 years older than me. And he said, "Oh, man, I joined the volunteer fire department." And I had no idea that there were volunteers. I just had no clue. And he said, "We have this junior membership program. If you're 16, you could join. It's like a cadet program."
Yeah.
And You should come. You know, we had career firefighters in Hagerstown, but we also had volunteers, Hagerstown, Maryland, out in the western part of the state. So he said, well, why don't you stop down some night? I'm going to be there. You know, come down Wednesday nights or training nights. So I went down, and when I walked into the firehouse, that smell, it was smoke, it was diesel fuel. I was hooked. As soon as I got the smell, I was hooked.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they showed me around, and, you know, they knew he had me on. It was like a used car salesman. The guy knew he had me. And it was just a matter of deciding what color the car was going to be. And so they started opening compartments, you know, and showing me around. And so that's how I joined. I joined in the fire service in September of 1970. And my friend Steve Bresler, who ended up being a battalion chief in Baltimore County, Steve was 2 years older than me. And Steve, as I was approaching 18, you had to be 21 to join most fire departments, but Baltimore City, you could join when you're 19. And at 18 years old, that seemed like the Mars mission to me. I mean, that was waiting 2 years, forget about it. So I heard that the Air Force had a guaranteed job program. And I signed up for the Air Force firefighter program in March when I was still in high school, and I shipped out in September and did a 4-year hitch in the Air Force as an Air Force firefighter, which is great because I already had roughly 2 years experience as a volunteer in Hagerstown. And I did 2 years at Mountain Home Air Force Base, where we had the 3322nd Strategic Air Command Bomb Wing with nuclear weapons, the B-52s. And so you can imagine being 18 years old. And
It's pretty cool.
it was pretty cool. And then I did 2 years there, and then I went to Germany at Sembach Air Base, headquarters for 17th Air Force, and then we had the 601st Air Combat Control group there, and did my 4-year hitch. And before I went to Germany, a friend of mine, Steve Lohr, who ended up being stationed with me in Montgomery County at Engine Company 19 some years later. Steve went on to become fire chief of Montgomery County, Maryland. And Steve told me about Silver Spring, Maryland. He said, you really should look into this program because, you know, what do you plan on doing when you get out? And I said, well, you know, I'm either going to join the fire department. And so he told me about that program, and when I got out of the Air Force, I moved into Montgomery County Station 19, which is on Seminary Road in the Montgomery Hills neighborhood, if you know where the Mormon Temple is at the Beltway. And so I lived in the firehouse while I was bartending part-time, and they had career firefighters there, but they had this special program where you get paid a stipend, and now when they needed you, they would hire you back as what they called casual labor. So you'd go work as a career guy for how many shifts they needed you. So I was burning the candle at both ends, running calls out of 19, sometimes getting detailed to Station 1, which was down on the DC line, a busy company. I went to Montgomery College, and that's where I met Ludi Benner, Frank Brannigan, and David Gratz. And then from there, I moved over to the University of Maryland and started working at the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute Training Academy. I remember I went in there, then now I got about 6 years experience. And I went in, I heard that they had a program, if you were going a student there, that you could get a job doing odd jobs there. So I'm going in thinking I'm going to be, you know, teaching breathing apparatus or something. So I went to the fire academy, and this guy is on a creeper underneath the truck. And I just kind of like tapped the side of the creeper and said, hey, you know, buddy, who's in charge here? Turns out that guy was the superintendent. He just liked working on cars.
Yes.
And he said, who's asking? And I told him. And he says, "What's your experience?" You know, and I tell him about my experience because that's pretty bad. And you know, having 6 years experience and all. And he said, "Well, how are you at cleaning toilets?" And I said, "Oh man, that's my specialty." And he said, "Okay, you can start Monday." I don't know. God must have told me to tell him that that was my specialty, because that was a pretty good gig working there, going to University of Maryland. And it was through
Was
those
that strictly?
contacts I had at Silver Spring, Don Flynn and David Gratz. Dave Gratz was the chief of Montgomery County, Maryland, and he was the senior guy at the International Association of Fire Chiefs Foundation. So I found out about a job that they had, a job opening there, and I got this job, and my desk was right outside of Gratz's office. So you talk about like a power mentor, you know, just sitting back and keeping your mouth shut and watching, you know, how he operated, how he handled himself. And so I spent a year there. I spent almost my service working for NTSB, and as an intern, I spent a year working for almost 2 years, I guess, as with the National Transportation Safety Board and the Hazardous Materials Division, working for Ludwig Benner. And I did really important work there, like, you know, Mike, the coffee machine, and we need coffee. Mike, go out, we need takeout Chinese. And so, you know, I just did odd jobs and, you know, made copies and supported the real investigators. But I learned so much. And a guy there took me under his wing. He was a senior investigator named Tom Lassane. And Tom would give me a past case that was already closed. And these files were huge. And they had everything in them, stuff that didn't make its way into the NTSB report, like autopsy reports, photographs of the autopsies, everything. And I'd get one of these a week, and we would have lunch on Friday. And then he would grill me. You know, what did you see in that photograph? What do you think about the way the body was positioned in the photograph? When you read the transcripts, did you think the guy was lying? Why did you think he was lying? And it was just like questions after questions. And then the next week I get another case file. So these big major incidents that are part of the historical record, you know, like Kingman, Arizona, Aniana, New York, the Houston vinyl chloride incident, where a firefighter was killed. You know, Kingman, Arizona, 13 firefighters killed. You know, all these major incidents. I got to see all the original case files, and I met some really cool people working there.
What was it like
Lee
to see some of those
Houston was one of
files?
the foremost aircraft investigators in the world, really. The Air France crash in Paris. You know, he was
Mike,
one
do
of
you
the
hear
team
us?
members there. I met a guy that was in the ideology lab that the CIA brought in to do.
Do you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Do you hear us?
I don't think.
Check 1, 2, 3.
All right, that makes me feel a lot better about the questions that have been just flying by.
Do you
We
hear
are
us,
hav-
Mike?
I hear you. You hear me, right?
So
I
have you
hear
guys
you.
back.
Yeah,
Yes.
do you hear us?
Do you hear us?
All right.
You want to go for a
Hello?
bathroom?
Okay. So I have you guys back now.
I don't know. Can
Yeah.
you hear us?
This is where I start cussing.
Oh, I don't think you can
Do
hear
you
us yet. Nope.
All right.
Has this been since it began? Probably. I mean, I've tried.
Okay, do I have you guys now?
Can
Yeah,
you hear me?
us?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys. What was the problem? You couldn't hear me, or I couldn't hear you?
No, we
we
couldn't
heard you
hear
the whole time.
You could hear. I could hear you.
You couldn't,
You couldn't hear us.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry.
So yeah, I was throwing some questions out there, and you were just plowing over them, and I'm like,
oh yeah.
all right.
Sorry.
maybe
This is the part where you shut up and they ask you questions.
no, you can keep talking. I had a couple of random thoughts that I wanted to expand on. The NTSB files. What was it like going through those disasters and those incidences? Basically, almost like being a first-hand investigator in all these things that are now case studies. Like, how was that?
It was like watching a movie.
It was like watching a movie. Were there
Yeah,
times that you
you'd
ever?
see, it's like watching it was like watching the trial but being in it, and I found myself taking sides with some of the people, like you start empathizing with certain people. There was a lesson that I picked up that you have to really just stick to the facts and focus on the mission. Some people tell a better story than others.
That's
Wow.
so. Were there times that you disagreed with the findings? Like, I'm sorry, I find this really kind of fascinating. The whole investigation part. Were there times that you looked at that, and when you were being interviewed, then at the end of the week by the senior investigator, that you were like, "Yeah, no, I don't agree with this."
Well, there were two cases where I felt that the records were being falsified. There was one case where I felt the record was being falsified, and there was another case where I thought that I have to be careful here. I felt that the people that were rescued were rescued in a priority based on their race.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we would have some pretty deep discussions on issues like that.
That's cool. That's got to be a really cool experience. So when you went to Maryland and the NTSB, had you already started to get into the hazmat world, or
yeah.
had you had? When did you start to get into the hazmat world? Like in all that resume stuff, at what point were you?
When I proved to myself that I was going to be able to graduate college, and push on beyond the associate's degree to a bachelor's degree, I was making the grades. I was not starving. I was getting by and gaining traction. And so now it's time to start really thinking about, I tested for Fairfax County, Virginia, and I tested for Montgomery County, Maryland, and I got on both of those lists, although I was not high on the list. So that actually ended up being a good thing, because being high on the list, you got to make a decision. Am I going or not? Which means that I got to quit school. So being lower on the list was actually an asset because it gave me better options. So my advice to younger guys is, if you get low on the list, that's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not. I was 18, and I was 2,237 on the FDNY list.
Hey, and look how you turned out.
Yeah, well, I guess that's debatable, huh?
No, it's. I admire your work, and it's been good work.
Thank you.
Yeah, so now it's time to make some decisions. So I went in to see Professor Frank Brannigan. You guys know Frank Brannigan.
Sure.
Everybody knows Frank in the business, and if you don't, you should. And you need to look that up and start reading his material. He's the guru of building construction. And Frank had a career. Frank had a career with the Navy Fire Service, and then he went to work for the Atomic Energy Commission, and then he retired from that. And as his retirement gig, he started up and built up into a national program, the Fire Science program at Montgomery College. This was a 2-year associate's degree program. So I went in to see Frank, and said, "Hey, I'm looking for some career ideas." And he told me, "Well, Mike, you got two courses. You can either be a generalist or you can become a specialist." And frankly, I think specialties are the way of the future. And two of them that are up and coming are arson investigation, fire investigation, which was a topic that interested me greatly, and hazardous materials. So I talked to about 5 guys that were well into their careers, that were like captains, battalion chiefs, and others, and asked for career advice. And I floated this idea by them. And one guy in particular, who I respected, said, "Mike, this hazmat thing is going to be a flash in the pan. You are making a huge career mistake if you go down this pathway." And so I didn't listen to that advice, and I'm glad I didn't. Well, other people that I talked to said specialization is going to be where the fire service is going, and boy, were they right.
Yeah.
I mean, this is way before special operations, way before technical rescue, way before confined spaces, way before fire and origin specialties. And
in the grand scheme of like time frames, or could you give us an approximate date? That way people can start to kind of link up, where this was happening in terms of when the rest of the national stage was coming on.
Yeah, so this would have been around 78, 77, 78.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was Benner's class was a required class. So Benner was Frank Brannigan goaded Benner, challenged Benner after the Kingman, Arizona incident. You guys can Google it if you're not familiar with it. You should be, if you're in the hazmat world. 13 firefighters killed from a BLEVE, boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. And Benner's thought was, and sounds kind of outrageous, but Benner's thought was, the firefighter's job is to change the outcome of the emergency. And if you can't do that, why even leave the fire station?
Right.
If they wouldn't have never left the fire station, this incident would have run the natural course of events for which the fire department intervening made the incident worse. Oh man, that was real hard to swallow for the firefighters union, the IAFF in Washington, the fire service instructors, and Frank Brannigan got pretty upset by it. And so, Benner came under scathing criticism at NTSB for this. And so Frank said, well, Ludi, if you're so smart, why don't you show us how to do it? So he said, okay.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
Hold my beer.
Hold my beer.
So rocked it out of the park.
So he developed this book, Hazardous Materials Emergencies. It's very thin, thick factor. And I took his class along with hundreds of others. And the first class, when we found out that Benner wasn't a firefighter, so he's got that working against him. Then he's talking about how we're going to analyze these incidents. We're thinking, man, this is going to be a rough class because this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid, check off the box on this. It's a required class. Second class, starting to pay attention. Third class, I need to buy another notebook. Fourth class, we're all meeting at the coffee pot talking about this guy. And by the fourth class, it was like, this guy's a genius.
Yeah.
I can't believe this guy. He's making sense.
He kind of, and I'm not kidding when I say this. There's a bit of like Einstein-ness to him in his work. And if you know anything, if you've ever studied any kind of physics or anything like that, the purpose of physics is to simplify thought processes, right? Like you want to make everything as unified as possible. Like the more simple the explanation is, it's generally the correct and we would say it's a beautiful explanation because it's simple and it's straightforward. And his work is simple and straightforward and beautiful. And all of our hazmat classes and the teachings, if you use his stuff to teach off of, you basically boil everything down to 5 words. Like and all the classes can be taught with 5 words. And that, to me, from somebody that studied physics, that's a beautiful thing.
It is. The general, our textbook, Greg Nolan, as you guys know, have hazardous materials management and the incident. And the 5th edition is about 650 pages. But if you go to page 350, you can see the general hazardous materials behavior model and the way containers are stressed, breached, released, engulfed, and how harm has occurred. All it's on one page.
Yeah.
So you can read the whole 650 pages and you're going to be a pretty good hazmat guy, pretty smart. But if you want to get real smart and be able to get down in the weeds and talk the talk and walk the walk and be able to systematically take every type of container and explain how it's going to come apart, how it's going to breach, how it's going to disperse, so on down the line, all you got to do is read page 350.
Yeah.
You should have that. If you're serious about hazmat, you should have that page memorized and be able to talk it and teach it.
All right, I got a question for you. Back in the day when you started out, the rules have changed and evolved from the beginning, which will, I from all the interviews with everybody we've done, started mid 1970s, but it really didn't go nationally heavy until like 84. Okay. So when you were getting in there, talk to us about the rules landscape and how it evolved.
Well, it was the Wild West. Let's start with OSHA. OSHA wasn't an idea. I think President Nixon signed this OSHA rule. He signed off on OSHA in 1970, and it became a living thing in 1971. I remember my career started, as a junior volunteer in 1970, officially 72 in the Air Force. I had a summer gig working construction before I went in the military, and we had to take OSHA training. And it was all like real basic stuff. The OSHA had the catch-all that they still have, the general duty clause, which is anything that doesn't fit under any other regulation. The employer has a responsibility to keep people safe. And you shouldn't employers shouldn't do dumb things that hurt employees. And then they started from that point building out the regulations over time. And so all of the safety regulations came after downstream, and the emergency response regulations were built one disaster or one problem at a time. So they're in the beginning. If we could be king or queen for a day and sit down and say, well, what's Mike and Bobby and Mike, what's the right way to do this? Well, let's sit down and write an emergency response planning and response regulation. And we would do that as good as we could from the ground up. And it didn't really happen that way. They came out with a fire brigade regulation. They came out with an evacuation regulation and so on down the line to try to fill the gaps. OSHA really didn't start really getting good at what, in my opinion, moving forward until they came out with the lockout tagout rule. The process safety rule was a good piece of work. All of those regulations, they all save lives. They were just done in a disjointed way. And then even after the public comment period, and OSHA wading through all of those public comments and trying to be reasonable and get it right, they still don't always get it right. So then they have to come out with directives that interpret for their own enforcement officers what the regulation really means. So for the emergency response for the fire brigade standard, I think they came out with the compliance directive, CPL 2-2 or something like that. And it was an interpretation. So it was a learning as you went along. But if you go back to the 70s, the employers' attitudes towards the workforce was not a lot different than Henry Ford's.
Run them hard.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we have unions,
Right.
you know, to protect workers and have them work reasonable hours and keep them safe. So yeah, there was in the early days a lot of pushback on these regulations.
Well, all right. So take us for a walk from the beginning of your interaction with hazmat to today. If you could summarize that and talk about the evolution of hazmat, like boots,
Yeah.
suits, gloves, meters, SOPs. Back in the day, it was level A all the way every day,
Mhm.
and now it's not really a thing. What is your interpretation of that whole operation right there?
Well, in the very beginning, the big challenge was to change attitudes. Greg Nolan and I used to call it the John Wayne days. You know, in every John Wayne movie, John Wayne he either punches somebody out, shoots somebody, chews somebody out, scares the crap out of somebody. You know, it was expected that as a firefighter or a cop, uh, that when you signed on for the job, if you get burned, shot, or stabbed as part of your job, that was part of your
Part of
job. Not only did the public kind of expect it, your employer expected it, and the folks that you worked with expected it. But when hazmat came along and we went from flammable liquids and gases, you know, which go all the way back to they really started coming into their heyday and during World War II, when refineries and chemical plants were built to support the war effort, and then more plastics, more and more chemicals were introduced in commerce to do everyday things that we like to do and enjoy to make our lives easier. More and more hazmat started coming on the scene, and the world got more complicated, and more firefighters got injured. I know in Prince George's County, when we started our hazardous materials program, the fire chief Jim Estep, I think that year that we were asked to take a look at the problem, I think we were averaging like 13 firefighters injured a year from hazmat. And the year we started to build the program, we had a firefighter killed in a natural gas explosion. And so enough was enough. So a change had to. We made the change from the John Wayne days to the go call Greg Knoll. You know, before Greg Knoll, there was somebody else named Mert Schnerd. You know, before him, it was somebody else. So most hazmat programs, typically there was one person in the department that maybe had a Coast Guard or Navy background or Air Force background that had dealt with flammable liquids and maybe munitions in the military. And so that person evolved into being the flammable gas and liquids person. And we used to call it special fires. Special fires, Mike Allen talked about special fires
Yes.
in his presentation, which I love. Yeah, so special fires were basically flammable liquids and gases and maybe corrosives and exotics like, you know, magnesium came along, the exotic metals and stuff like that. So the point where I'm going with this is when we went from John Wayne to this specialist, we became people dependent. So as long as you had that person who everybody in the department could name, you know, you're out on like chemical spill, call Bill, you know, call Ralph. And this person would come out and whatever Bill or Ralph said, that's what you did.
They were the hazmat team.
They were the hazmat team. They were the special fires kind of person. So they tended to have some previous experience, and they really were interested in it. So they were hungry, like most of us are, for information, except it was hard to get. And maybe if you were in Detroit, maybe you'd call the guy in Los Angeles. Back in the early 70s, there was Charles Bamey from Los Angeles. He was, I think, the guy that formed LA went through the same process, and they said, we need a chemical squad. You're going to start one up.
You know, you say that now, and it doesn't hold much weight if for a young person listening. But I think people have to be reminded that back in the day, to be in Fairfax or Virginia and call somebody in LA was damn near an act of God.
Oh, it was a long distance call. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of these guys reached in their pocket and put quarters in the machine because they had. If you want to call LA, you're calling it on your nickel.
Right.
You know.
All right. You
And
know what's
so
another thing?
And you gotta
You
hope they're there to pick up the phone. Like,
I have to say, because this is what our fifth or sixth of these things, and I don't know if anybody else has picked up on this. I hope I'm not the only one, but it seems the guys we talk to all know each other nationally. Like there was a dozen dudes that were the hazmat guys in the 70s and 80s. Now there's tons of guys that are the hazmat guys. Like it was a incredibly small cadre of guys that were on the short. And I know, Mike, you're gonna get this, but some people won't. What a Rolodex was. Like,
yeah.
we used to have this little paper thing. We used to flip it around, and your Rolodex was really limited in the 70s and 80s, and even the early 90s. There was a dozen, 50, 100 dudes that were across the country and the world that were good at this stuff. And everybody had each other's name, their phone number, their fax number, because there wasn't any emails and stuff like that. But like that was a thing. I picked that up.
Yeah, if you met a guy that was good at cylinders, you had this guy filed. Greg and I worked together for almost 40 years on different activities, and Greg's real organized. I'm organized too, but slightly different than he is. So Greg would come into my office and say, who do we know? Who's the best guy on cylinders? And I'd say, look under H. Well, why would I find it under H? I said, I knew I'd never remember the guy's name, but we took a helicopter ride with that guy. Don't you remember that helicopter ride?
That sounds like how my brain works.
And so you under H, I'd look on helicopter, and there's the guy, and then it says cylinder with the guy's name. It used to drive him nuts. He never look in there. He's too afraid to look at my Rolodex. He would just ask me. But yeah, there was Rolodex. But back to the question. So we went from John Wayne to people dependent, and the next step in the process was to become system dependent. So the problem with people dependent is back in the day when you had the rare call, you could always call that one person. It was okay to wake him up at night. If he's on vacation, you could maybe get him on the phone and talk to him, get the guy on the radio. But as companies became more busy and there were more calls, the problem we were having is when your specialist, the people dependent person, the specialist was at the scene, it was going to turn out great. I'll tell you what to do. You do it. It's all going to turn out great. All the chiefs trusted that person because that person was good. But when that person wasn't there, you started having different results. Incidents would take longer. State police would get really pissed off at the guy talking to him because he couldn't explain why we had to have the interstate closed. It was problems, a lot of problems. And then so that's kind of how we developed. Greg and Jim Yavor and I developed the 8-step process, which was the beginning of our textbook, because the fire chief gave us the charge. There's got to be a better way to do this. You go figure it out. And so we were talking. We were at the National Fire Academy at the outhouse, and over a couple beers, we started brainstorming this. And that's when we discovered, well, the problem is that, as long as Greg or Jim or Chuck is there, it's going to turn out okay. But what if that person's not there? Well, unless you've become very clear about what your expectation is for performance, unless you've become very clear what the standard operating procedure is, don't be surprised if nobody follows the SOP, because there isn't one. So everyone, these battalion chiefs or the company officer would do the best thing that they could based on the information that they had available and the training that they had, which was pretty limited.
Well, so clearly you guys understood how to do it, and you're going from person to system. So how did you guys take what you were doing and create a system out of it, right? Like, how did you analyze your thought processes and your way of thinking and be able to put it on paper to hand to somebody to say, follow this and you'll be okay?
Well, Greg and Jim Yavor and I did road shows like, everybody in the fire service that enjoys teaching. We'd spend the weekends. We were on the road at least one weekend a month teaching hazmat. And we learned a lot from the students. Hopefully they learned from us. And it became obvious that Benner called this the cookbook approach. And I mean this. I mean this in no disrespect. If you go back to and look at Bamey's book and Meidell's books, written in 1970 and 73, the way they would approach them is they would talk about an incident, a particular product, an exact product, and then they would talk about the chemistry of what was going on with that product. So, if you want to cook a really good pot roast, you go to America's Test Kitchen and you get the pot roast menu. And it does a great job taking care of the pot roast. It's a really lousy recipe for chicken fricassee. So, the cookbook approach was there would be what was the right solution for flammable liquids was not the right solution for poisons, or for corrosives or for explosives and so forth. So there needed to be more of a systematic approach. And when we came up with the 8-step process, we had already, Greg and I were on the same page about Benner. In fact, that's how I met Greg, was Jim Yavor introduced me to him at the International Association of Fire Chiefs meeting. And by this time, I'd moved on from NTSB and was working at the IFC. And I was at the meeting in Kansas City, and Jim said, hey, come. We were in a barbecue line. Hey, come on up here. I want you to meet this guy. So I met Greg for the first time, and he was teaching at Iowa State, and he was teaching hazmat. And so we started trading notes like, well, what kind of stuff are you reading? And he said, well, I'm reading this guy called Benner. I got everybody calls it the White Book. So, this is the White Book because it was like the Beatles album. It was white. So we just called it the White Book. So Greg and I started exchanging Bennerisms, and it was like Mr. Spock. We were on the mind meld. We were on the same page about where we were going with this. But further down the timeline, like 1982, when we in the early 80s, it was around 1982, we decided that the only way we're going to get results from battalion to battalion, shift to shift, is if we define what the basic SOP should be. So we just started talking about brainstorming. Well, what do we need? What's the most important thing that we need to do? Well, if we could just get them to isolate the site until the right guys show up to know what they're doing, life, is going to get a lot better. So, we came to the conclusion, if you could separate the spectators from the players and the people from the problem, it's kind of like when you took your first aid class, the most important thing they told you was do no harm. If you don't do anything else,
sounds simple.
Stop the bleeding and just don't do any harm until the ambulance arrives. And so that was the first step, is if we could accomplish that. And then we moved on to, one of the problems that we have is guys are wading in and implementing and coming up with tactics, and they don't even know what they're dealing with. So the next thing we should do is focus on identifying the material. And does it make sense to do anything until we evaluate what the hazards are? And then we started exploring, what's the difference between a hazard and a risk? Well, hazards are constant. They don't change. The flash point of gasoline is always going to be minus 45. But spill 55 gallons in a refinery versus 55 gallons of gasoline in a Walmart warehouse, the risk profile is completely different, even though the hazards haven't changed. And one of the things that a big takeaway from Benner's work was most firefighters were killed back in the 70s and early 80s, not because they didn't necessarily understand the hazards. It's because they didn't understand the risk.
And so evaluating risk was a little dicier to tackle. And so now we got 4 basic steps. And so once I have an incident action plan, now I need to, now that I know what it is, I got people separated from problem. I've identified the material or materials. I've evaluated the hazards and the risk. Now I need to determine what the best kind of PPE would be. And then once you've done that, then you can implement response objectives. And for there, you're talking strategy and tactics. And then it makes no sense to implement a response objective if you don't know how to decontaminate and have decon set up. So decon's the next step. And then maybe we should have an official termination, because that fine line between when the incident's over, like Waverly, Tennessee, it got warm. They started taking off their turnout gear. They still got this LPG car there. They're going to lift it. The line got blurred. So we ended up with these 8 steps. And we turned it into a training program, trained every station, every shift. That took a long time. And then we developed an SOP and a general order where we knew that we had won the battle, or the war really. Was we had every department has a battalion officer that it's chief dark cloud. Everything's negative. Not going to work. It's never work here. We went on this overturned corrosive tank truck, and this chief came up to us, the hazmat team members, and said, "I'm on step 4." And it's like, whoa, if this guy is getting it, everybody's going to get it. And so that was the shift from going people dependent to system dependent. And we started, developing a systematic approach. Later on, fast forward in the tape, when Greg and I left public safety and went into consulting and did a lot of work in the refining and chemical industry, the best performing teams, the best in class industrial teams, and the best safety programs were system dependent, where you had a defined procedure and you got pretty much desirable results systematically. Later on, we translated this into high volume water flow for refineries. We called it, we wanted to be able to flow 10,000 gallons a minute of water in 10 minutes, 24 hours a day, 24/7, 10/10, 24/7. And so that was clear, easy to articulate.
Right.
So how do we do that? That's the goal. And then, you develop systematic, system-dependent organizations that get repeatability in those results, working towards that goal.
Well, okay, so naturally developing a system like this doesn't just appear out of nowhere, right? It takes, there's a lot of, well, let's try this, variations, things fail. What were some of in trying to create a system, what were some of the instances in which there were differences of opinions and some conflict in how to go about building the system, and how did those conflicts get resolved?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. The general order and the training in of itself wasn't enough to really make it system dependent and avoid missing important things and making mistakes. And so we went with the checklist system. We were big on checklist. As a military, Greg and I were both former Air Force by this time, and so checklist wasn't a hard sell to us, because the military is very checklist oriented. And one of our team leaders, Chuck Thomas, was very interested in aviation. And eventually he left the fire department after almost 13 years service and became a pilot. And he just retired last year as a first officer for United. Flew all over the world. And so, the pilots, one of the things is on the checklist, it says, "Hey, stupid, put the wheels down." The reason why that's on the checklist is a lot of pilots landed their plane with the wheels up. So they put it on the checklist. So for each one of these major functions, like for the entry team, safety team, decon team. We developed checklists for those, and the team members did them. We developed checklists, and then we would go out and actually run a drill, and we'd videotape it. And then we'd go over the videotape, find better ways to do it. And the team members, made it better and better. Yeah, so we became big believers in the checklist. And so, just like a really good musician, I don't need to read the sheet music. It's there in front of me. Now and then everybody's brain drops out of socket one day or another. And so when you start panicking, your brain drops out of socket, your checklist there is your little friend. And you can start going through it. Or maybe you got the checklist in your head, and now I can catch up. I got plenty of time. Time is on my side, or maybe I have an aide, and we just go through that checklist and we start. And you know what? You usually miss something. But the thing about checklists is checklists never panic, and checklists have institutional memory. And if you embrace them and you bring them into your team, and just don't give lip service to them, and they're in the binder on the truck, and you make them better over time. When new people come in, they don't know the pain that went into developing that checklist.
Well, all right, that's the core that I kind of want to get into, and archive is what was that pain? Like, how did you guys come across that? That was where the basis for the question came from. Like, what led to it? Because I think right now so many people they come onto the job and they've got all this stuff that they have to do, and they don't know why they're doing it. They don't know where the beginning came from. They don't understand how they got where they are. And I really do believe that you can't move forward without understanding where you came from. Mm-hmm. So what was
hazmat is a hands-on. Most of the things we do is a very hands-on. It's a thinking game, but when you get down to mitigating incidents, it's a hands-on sport. So we always look for people that knew how to fix stuff. We had guys that were ex-Coast Guard or Coast Guard Reserve, and we had guys on our team that could tear pumps apart and fix the pumps. And then we had a guy on our team that he spoke fluent Russian because his mom and dad spoke Russian. He was an engineer and a computer guy. We never let that guy in a suit. It just wasn't safe. We let him in. We let him dress out once, and it was finally kept talking and finally like, shut up and get in the suit. Zip him up so he stops talking.
And that's okay, right? Like, you want that good computer guy where the good computer guy is supposed to go.
I'm not making fun of him because he had a whole skill set that we didn't have, that other guys didn't have. So diversity. I mean, if you look at the way the Green Berets are organized, like an A team, an Alpha team, you have an explosives guy, you have a language guy, and so on down the line. Everybody has a specialty. So, we would seek out people that, very diverse backgrounds. I mean, we had guys that could operate heavy equipment.
So do you think there's a balance there within the hazmat team because, I mean, clearly there is a benefit to having that guy, right? To have that specialty guy. But then there's a beauty in the checklist and the system. So where's the balance in a hazmat team and a hazmat response where, you do want everybody to be able to run the system, but you also need to have the guy that's got that in-depth knowledge that nobody else does?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, that's... I see where you're going with that. Yeah, I think that's important. Of course, you're always going to go with your best person. If I got if I'm always going to have my best decon person, if I can be the decon unit leader. I'm always going to have that guy that speaks Russians, that can program computers, and he's always going to be my go-to guy. But if one of my specialists doesn't show up, everybody needs to be able to do everything,
Right.
interchangeable
Yeah.
parts. One of the things when we first started our team, I was looking for guidance, and there just wasn't a lot. You could call teams like I could call Ron Gore from Jacksonville and ask him, how they were doing it in Jacksonville. But in order to build a team that was flexible with interchangeable parts, I went to other sources. I looked at how the Army stood up the Delta Force. I read stuff that was written by Bo Greitz. I read a book called Inside the SAS, how the British Special Air Service did their training, how they did their training, and how they would take different specialists. Because these military specialty teams have the same problem. You have, even though everybody is a Ranger, a SEAL, a PJ, or whatever your tier 1 or tier 2 specials are, they have to be interchangeable to do different things. And sometimes the solution to your problem is not in your own discipline. You have to go outside and look for solutions outside.
Yeah, so there's definitely a balance, right? You never want a manager of a team to just strictly rely on checklists, and you never want them to just strictly rely on the specialists and the people with the deep knowledge.
Oh yeah, well, this comes to another issue, and that is the training problems and issues. When we started out, a lot of the training before standards were more dictating what you should be trained on. A lot of the training, and I run into this in industry a lot in my years, is the training program is what I call topical based. It's a bunch of guys on the training committee get together and we decide, what's a cool topic. Like I was in a refinery once when I looked at their training program, and they had a training class on auto extrication, but the speed limit in the refinery is 10 miles an hour. Whereas, that being able to put out a pump steel fire is pretty important. So part of developing that interchangeability between your team members is identifying what those core competencies are. And of course, where we are today in NFPA 475 is you have guidance on what those core competencies are. But in terms of going back to basics, when you're starting to make safety mistakes and you're getting sloppy and you're not getting results, I'm betting that you got training issues where we've migrated away from understanding what those core competencies are. I mean, if part of your mission is gasoline tank trucks, then one of your core competencies is how to safely drill the gasoline tank truck.
So we're going to take a 5-minute quick break. Okay. And when we come back, I have a question for Mike. It is going to be, what is the dumbest thing you fought against in your time in hazmat?
Okay.
All right. So we'll see you guys in 5 minutes. We're just going to hit the head and we'll be right back. And just like that, we're back.
Bladders are empty, glasses are full.
I'm happy.
Very happy. All right. So before the break, I alluded to a question I wanted to throw at Mike. What is the dumbest thing you've ever fought against in your career in hazmat?
When I was on a team leader on the Prince George's County, Maryland hazmat team, we had good visibility. You know, the chief liked the idea that we would all be in coveralls, and it said PGFD, Hazardous Materials Response Team,
Across
on
the
the
back.
back. And
Yeah.
big, and everybody was proud of those. Only problem is we're on the hazmat team, and they're made out of they're PVC, they're flammable. So
Sorry.
it's kind of like that. I remember
So close.
The department's never wrong, but sometimes they're just not right.
Right.
And so we tried. Greg Knoll was our team leader, and we tried. Greg pushed and pushed for this thing, and we were all proud of the great job that Greg did. Writing memos and coming up with OSHA this and NTSB that and so forth, trying to justify this. And so one night we get this mutual aid call to another county, and we had this truck with a mixed bag of chemicals. Chemical A goes boom, chemical B mixes with A, it explodes and burns. And so this is a long ordeal, and it was pretty cold. So we had logistics bring in these portable heaters, and Greg had just done an entry and came out, and so he's all sweaty and he's cold, and he's got his flammable coveralls on, standing next to this
Oh my God.
heater, and he set himself on fire. So it was he's doing the stop, drop, and roll thing on the highway. I didn't see it happen. I was
What's that
in
smell? You
I
smell
was
that?
I was working information. I was doing chemical research or something, with a Russian-speaking guy, and then I heard on the radio that a firefighter was being transported. I said, well, "What's going on?" So, well, Greg's burned. How did he get burned? It's like, so yeah. Fast forward the tape. We all got Nomex coveralls. I mean, but sometimes
Shocking.
this is the kind. I love Greg. This is the kind of committed guy that I'm talking about here.
Oh, he's
So-
committed. He should
He's
be committed.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was. Of course, you know how that movie turned out. He was continuously punished by team members for setting himself on fire. But
Well-
yeah, it was amazing how fast. Once they sold the burn reports, amazing how fast those coveralls
yeah.
showed up.
Oh yeah.
They, back in those days, they were pretty expensive.
Our producers have limited me to one more question. So the question's going to be a follow-up question from earlier before. You had stated that you were at a crossroads at some point where you could either specialize, generalize, and if you specialized, it would be arson or hazmat. What made you choose hazmat? Why did you go down the hazmat road?
I thought
Sorry,
it was
you can
pretty
say
cool.
it. Money.
No, it wasn't money. There was a very high cool factor.
Okay.
I told you my dad made explosives. When I was in the military, dealing with military munitions and that specialty training that I got, it just seemed like when it got down and dirty, and they called in EOD or they called in the munitions people or the bomb squad, I always thought that was pretty cool. I wish I could give you like some highly motivated answer, but it was the cool factor. That was it.
Listen, mine was I was voluntold to do it. Like that's pretty much
See, I wasn't. I came from that rescue type side where it was a lot of swagger and a lot of movement, and like when things went sideways and the rescue guys came in, everyone was like, "Wow, these guys are amazing." But there was a very different thing when the hazmat guys came in. The rescue guys would stand back and go, "All right, you guys got it." There was no company that I was ever in that had a different move like Hazmat One, where when we came in, everybody, and I mean everybody, stood back.
I just thought it was wanted to be the pro from Dover. It's like the original MASH movie. We want to be in the kid's chest by 6 o'clock. We want to be out by 9 o'clock. We want to be on the golf course by 12. It just. Yeah, and I just saw also a lot of opportunity, from, well, the guidance I got from Brannigan is, if you can get into a specialty on the ground floor, the big advantage of that you have is you can help build the program, you can help set the standard, you can help be a pathfinder, help pave the way, and he was right, and I think we did those things.
Well, that's one of the things what we're doing, like literally right this second with you, is me and Mike are definitely not ground floor guys, but you and the guys we're interviewing are. And so we're trying to translate what's in your head to the next generation, because this medium is going to live on. And those lessons learned, I certainly don't think, and I hope this is not the end of the conversation, is that I want to bring every one of you guys back, and I'm still looking for more and more and more guys to come on the show and to mind dump the history of hazmat, because this is going to be a living legacy of hazmat going forward. Me and Mike feel very strongly about this, and that's why we keep going and doing these things. So
the cool thing about where we are today is versus where I started. I mean, I'm retired now, but after looking back 40, 50 years, the advantage of getting in on the ground floor or whatever that may be, and there always is going to be a new specialty in the future, is it's hard to be wrong when there's nothing out there. I mean, you will enjoy a lot of political freedom for a while. It'll be fresh air and full speed ahead until they figure out what you're doing and what it's costing. But it can be a fun journey. Yeah, I'm going to die, and there's going to be a new Mike Hildebrand that's going to be a specialist in something else in the future, some new energy source we haven't discovered yet. It hasn't been invented. There'll be a new bombing, a new crisis, a meteor, aliens. It'll be something in the future. The firefighter is never going to run out of work. And when I started, hazmat was a specialty. Now it's a specialty within a specialty. I mean, you could, if you know your stuff on energy, things like electric batteries, lithium batteries, LNG, helium, hydrogen, and all these, the future where we're going right now. Yeah, you could spend a year or two just going around the country, if you're any good, teaching classes just on that one topic.
Yeah, look at Paul Rogers.
You could write a book on this.
I have one more question, and then I have a series of photos that Greg sent in, and maybe a photo or two from Greg not sending in. The question is, what tip or trick did a senior member of the team teach you that still stands out in your mind?
Well, one very valuable lesson that I learned is the importance of keeping your mouth shut and going last in a big meeting. And this worked out really well when Greg and I went to the Winchester tire dump fire, where we had 8 million tires on fire, and all the King's horses and all the King's men and women showed up. And all these experts came up with these wingnut ideas. And we had our own idea that we thought was the best way to go by dealing with this problem. And we just let all these dumb ideas go out first.
Just let them go.
And the crazier the ideas got and the dumber they sounded, the more brilliant we sounded.
Like farts in the wind.
The more brilliant our ideas sounded. The practical country boy, solution to the problem, like let's get a drag line in here and divide and conquer and break them into small piles and put them out one pile at a time. It's going to take a couple months, but that's the only way you can put this out. Or you can just keep doing it your way and wait till the Potomac River gets oil in it. That is a good. Another good lesson is that I learned kind of the hard way is listen to the senior, what a lot of guys call the senior man. In the future it could be the senior woman. There's a senior person usually in almost every company or certainly every battalion that just for whatever reason chose not to take the career path to become an officer. And they have years of experience, and experience counts, and they develop a sixth sense and a gut instinct for what can go wrong. And I can tell you that one of those guys saved my butt. I almost went into a basement that had no stairs. He grabbed me just as I was stepping off. I'd have gone right into a burning basement. And maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation, at least not with the face I got, which is not that good to begin with.
We could have blurred you out. That's fine.
It's just. I think there's just great value in the senior person, and if you're smart and you're young, you'll listen to them. You're lucky if you got somebody like that on your team. I like to pay homage to somebody that I greatly respect that fits in that category is Bill Hand. Bill Hand was a member of the Houston hazmat team and then Harris County. I think Bill probably has been on, I don't think I'm exaggerating to say 5,000 calls.
Wow.
Yeah, when Bill Hand talks, I listen. There's not all those books that you talked about. There's not a single book there's not a single chapter or in any of our hazmat books that Bill Hand hasn't been one of the reviewers. Highly value his opinion and his experience.
I love it. I have some photos here that I have from you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just quickly go through these photos and just give us a little bit of a background on each photo to kind of give a little perspective of what you sent in. This is
that's
Afghanistan.
No, this is the I was the chief safety officer on the Afghanistan evacuation mission on the U.S. receiving side. So in 21 days, we received 14,000 men, women, and children from Afghanistan during the pullout. And we ran this operation 24/7. And as the chief safety officer, I had, one time I had 20 people, but we had a corps of 10 assistant safety officers at 2 different locations. So these people would come from Afghanistan, from Kabul. The Air Force flew them to like Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany and Amman, Jordan, and then they would fly there. So we had people showing up. We had people that showed up here with shrapnel wounds. Had a guy that was shot with a .223 round through the arm. We had impetigo, bed bugs, pregnant people deliver babies, got people that had heart attacks. Every hour on the hour for almost 21 days, 24/7, we had an ambulance taking somebody out of here. So what does that have to do with hazmat? Well, when the magnitude of the mission, which just like popped up overnight, this, as you know from your reading the history, this wasn't a plan. They just, when the Air Force took, a guy told me from the Air Force that there was a fine line between a courts martial and getting the air medal if you were a pilot flying passengers out of Afghanistan. That's how many, they packed them in there.
Wow.
And so they came here. So I needed people that understood risk management, that could think on their feet, that could make decisions right away. And so my colleague, Greg Sox, who was working the same job I was working on the West Coast for the Department of State for refugees coming in from South America, Ecuador. I called him and he said, why don't you use hazmat guys? So we came up, I used a guy, his name is Rick Blanford, who was a captain in Montgomery County, retired, and was on the Montgomery County hazmat team. And we got hazmat team guys. Some of them were retired. Some of them were actually on shift. And so I needed a lot of guys to make up the shifts. And so I used hazmat team guys. I know of at least for sure confirmed one save where I had a small Afghan kid almost got run over by one of those sewer pump out trucks.
Mm-hmm.
He literally pulled him by the scruff of the neck out of the way. And what I wanted to include this so I could talk about it, because if your hazmat folks out there listening, don't undervalue your skill set. It has value. It's highly valued. You probably are undervaluing it. You're thinking of my value is what I'm giving to my department on the hazmat team. But I'll take a special operations, fire department's police or fire or military special operations person because they just are unflappable. This is a high stress. This was a high stress environment with every kind of problem, the health and safety you could think of. And the guys, the hazmat team guys I had working for me, they knocked down every problem.
Well, Mike, we're here anytime you need us.
Yeah.
You might.
Well,
You might be the
of
first.
highly
You might not be the
talented.
first guy that regretted saying that.
Yeah.
I got no problem. I will absolutely do that with you.
Okay,
Speaking of
that
highly
was.
talented, Mike was a model, if you didn't know.
Oh,
Yeah.
One day I got this phone call from a guy I've known for many years. Gordon Massingham was the owner and director of the Emergency Film Group, and Gordon started out in film and then made the transition to video. He's done hundreds of videos for police and fire, and one of his cameramen is named Jim Simeone. And Jim called me one day, and his wife worked in a top-end advertising agency, and said her company got a contract to do a TV commercial, and they're looking for an older guy that will come across as an older guy, but not too old, but they don't want a younger guy to do it. And what do you think about doing a commercial? And I thought he was kidding. And so I said, I don't know, I don't, it's not, I'm not good at this kind of stuff. And my wife, Joanne, said, oh, what the heck? Why don't you give it? Were you afraid to try it? You afraid you're going to fail?
chicken.
So I said, all right. So yeah, they flew me out to Hollywood, flew out there first class, and I did this TV commercial. So the way they do these commercials is they have a test market that they run them in, and they actually did three
Wait.
commercials.
They flew you out to stand in somebody's driveway?
I stood in the driveway, and I was a firefighter and said firefighter kind of stuff in this TV commercial.
Oh,
And so
my
that's
gosh.
the director. That's the director, and I'm in this driveway
Oh
in
my
Hollywood,
God.
a real house. And so I actually did a real TV commercial in Hollywood. And so they test this in the market. And one day I get this text, and it's Rick Emery. And he said, Mike, I just spit my sandwich out. I just saw you on TV on the Chicago station on a TV commercial. I couldn't believe it. And so I started getting these calls, from people that saw this commercial. Mike, oh man, you're in a TV commercial. I said, this is really disappointing because I spent over 30 years as a consultant. I never missed a paycheck as a consultant. It's really hard to do that. to find the work, do the work, send the bills out. You know, like you said, I wrote a bunch of
Yeah.
textbooks, co-authored a bunch of textbooks, and did all these cool things. But now I'm somebody because I'm in a TV commercial. You know, but it was fun. That's a picture of Jim Yavora.
Yeah.
I mentioned Jim as one of our original hazmat team members. Jim was killed in the line of duty in 1988. It's a long story, but the short of it is he was on an accident scene and was struck by a car and killed.
Oh.
They flew him to the trauma center in Baltimore, but they couldn't save him. And that really took the wind out of my sails. Jim was the guy that convinced us that Greg and I could write a book together. Jim approached us about writing a book. If it wasn't for Jim, there would be no hazardous materials managing the incident. There would be no Greg Knoll lifelong partnership and friendship because we would have never met each other. It was Jim that introduced us to each other. This is the first edition of the book. I just want to compare the thick factor, as Mike Callan calls it, of the first edition to the second edition.
Oh my
Wow.
God, wow.
Yeah, so Jim came over to the house on a Wednesday night. Jim was a journalist by training, a professional, had a 4-year degree in journalism, and he could write. And he used to work for the Robert J. Brady Company doing fire service books. And Jim came to the house on Wednesday evening. He was so happy that he had finished the manuscript to this first edition textbook. This was in 1988. And we talked about, what's the next project? And he wanted to do something on leadership. And I went out to, now it's Friday night, I went out to dinner to a Mexican restaurant with my wife. When I came back, there were like 30, 40 messages on my answering machine. And the first one was from Greg. Greg, Mike, give me a call. It's important. And then they got worse as I went down the messages, and the last one was Mike from Greg, Mike, Jimmy's dead. And so, he never saw the book to fruition. He never saw it in print. And so following that, it really took the wind out of our sails. We managed to finish it, bring it to production. It was published by Oklahoma State University Fire Protection Publications. And we decided to turn a tragedy, and something negative. And I was in my 30s. In your 30s, you're still wearing your Superman cape. You still think you're invincible. This is when I realized that I wasn't invincible. If a guy like Jim Yavora that was book smart, Alan Brunacini said Jim Yavora was the full package. He was book smart, street smart, and best of all, he could write.
Wow.
So if a guy like that can get killed making a mistake, you can get killed.
Well, you can check out a little bit more of the backstory of that at yld.org and find out.
Yeah,
we started
a foundation, Yavora Leadership Development Foundation. This is our 36th year in operation. We've given over 112 scholarships away. So go to our website or like us on Facebook. Go to Facebook. We're on X and all those social media platforms, LinkedIn. Hats off to Jim Yavora and his family.
I think we're going to end it on this one. Your good friend, Luddy.
Yeah, Ludwig Benner. That's a picture of Ludi and I at Fairfax Hazmat. Gordon Massingham did this program with a lot of hazmat luminaries. I think it was called Hazmat Legends or something. He wanted to capture guys like Benner on video, lessons learned and so forth. And I went over to Ludi's house. He lived in Oakland, Virginia, and I picked him up. Ludi and I were lifelong friends. He died when he was 92. He was still working and writing things up till 90. Ludi Benner, I owe a lot of my career to Ludi. He took me, he was a great mentor. He was a good friend, him and his wife, Helen, and his daughter, Holly. I once asked Ludi what they taught him at Carnegie Mellon University. He's a chemical engineer. And he said, Mike, they taught me how to think. Yeah, nicest guy I've ever known. Real gentleman, smart guy. If you can
love it.
find, mentoring is important. If you could find a mentor and you're lucky enough, and it's tremendous value to your career.
Mike, I can't say thank you enough, and I know this is not going to be the only one that's out there, because we've had conversations, and I don't mean to put any pressure on you, because I've talked to Greg about this. I haven't talked to really you about this, but there was conversations about doing a Greg and Mike conversation about Ludwig.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
doing
I'd
a
love
show
to do
just
that.
on him.
I would love to hear more. I find his work so absolutely fascinating, so integral. I'd love to hear the backstories behind him and the things that you can't read in a textbook.
Yeah, I got lots of great stories to talk about Ludi and some of his investigations, and yeah, he plowed new ground.
Yeah, I think what we're
He's
gonna
really
do is
he's real. I see him as the godfather of hazmat, at least the modern thinking of analytical thinking.
yeah.
I wouldn't be.
I
I wouldn't be who I am today without Ludi.
I think what we're going to do is we're going to get Chief Bob Ingram from New York City probably in the next month or so, and then during that time we're going to get with you and Greg and get our files out, and we'll just hone this thing down just to the right spot, get the right pictures, get the right questions, and then tell the story, because it's one of the ones we couldn't get before he was gone. And so I want to kind of archive that from guys that were integrated, that were part of his flow. And I think it's important for the whole community. So
Yeah, let's talk
thanks.
more about that. We might be able to get some video clips of him that we can get access to, and so people can hear his voice and
Oh, I would love that.
hear him talk.
Love it. So the white book that you were referring to, we're going to put the link to that in the show notes. And so if you want a copy of that, that's going to be available, right?
Yeah, it's free. The Benner family has taken all of his works and his papers. If you just type in Ludwig, like Ludwig von Beethoven, Ludwig Benner, Benner Jr., and type Ludwig Benner Jr. has hazmat papers, or there's a website you can download a lot of stuff that he's written. But the white book I mentioned, that link that I sent you has it for free.
Okay. We're going to add that into the show notes here, and also provide the link to the website so you can just download it for free, all his work. So, Mike, I can't thank you enough on, taking time out of your night and your week is a big thing. I definitely think we need to have you back on a couple more times.
Looking forward to it, man.
Great.
Really appreciate it. Stay safe, guys.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.